Hello everyone, today we will continue with our light French vehicles with the Renault UE, a small carrier vehicle from the start of World War II. The full name of this vehicle was the Renault UE model 1931. Renault UE, the UE is just another factory code given to this specific design of vehicle, and the model 1931 is just the year when the design was made. This vehicle was also known as a Chenillette. In French, chenil means the tracks, so Chenillette is just a word for small tracked vehicle. This specific type is a UE2, and the UE2 was an upgrade over the Renault UE, and it just has better mechanical performance. 8 horsepower was gained while improving the engine, and there were also a few cosmetical changes as well. And this specific type was restored and called Odette. In the early 1930s, France pursued its policy of mechanization and looked for a small armored supply carrier. The goal was to provide a lightweight vehicle capable of transporting munitions, supplies and towing light guns, since large-scale production of armored personnel carriers was considered too costly at the time. Several companies presented prototypes, including Renault, Citroën and Brandt, all of which drew inspiration from British vehicles such as the Vickers Cardinal Lloyd Tanquette. After trials, the Renault design was selected in 1931. A pre-series was built in 1932 and full-scale production began in 1934. When Renault's military division was nationalized and reorganized as AMX, production of the UE continued, later joined by other firms such as Berliet and Fouga. The Chenillette was allocated to standard infantry regiments as well as mechanized infantry divisions, with the first deliveries beginning on 10 September 1932. Its primary role was that of supply vehicle, designed to carry ammunition and other necessities to frontline positions while under artillery fire. The vehicle's light armor was sufficient to stop shell fragments and small arms fire at ranges greater than 300 meters. The Renault UE could transport or tow approximately 1,000 kilograms of supplies, up to 350 kilograms in its cargo bin and another 600 kilograms in its trailer. To indicate that they were towing a load, the tractors carried a small rectangular steel plate on the roof, painted with a yellow triangle on a contrasting blue background. The trailer could be dropped without exiting the vehicle. In addition to supply duties, the UE could also tow the Hotchkiss 25mm anti-tank gun. In this configuration, the weapons crew followed on foot, while the gun commander rode beside the driver to guide him to the new firing position. However, in most Renault UE vehicles, the driver operated alone, without a dedicated commander. France initially ordered 6,000 of these vehicles, and eventually 5,800 were produced, so quite a lot. In September 1939, only 2,800 were produced, but on that moment, France ended the war by declaring war on Nazi Germany after it invaded Poland. And after that occasion, the French industry went into an emergency program, and almost 300 were produced each month, so eventually more than 4,800 were produced in total. So let's have a look around the vehicle and see what else we can talk about. It is really a small carrier vehicle, and essentially it was used to tow loads, so to tow ammunition, mortar rounds, an anti-tank gun, so quite a lot of purposes, but really a small carrier tracked vehicle, which was not intended to be on the front line, because the armor was quite thin, only used to withstand small caliber rounds, so nothing more. And it was also not intended to be really on the front line, but more backstage with the rear echelon troops to tow the materials that were needed. It's only 1 meter 7 wide, so quite narrow, a bit more than 2 meter 8 long, and it weighs around 2 tons, a bit more than that, almost 3 tons. So quite small, quite compact. The height of the vehicles is only 1 meter 25, so quite low. Here at the end of the vehicle, you have this kind of box, which is also used to carry these loads. And this box can also be tilted to more easily dismount everything while still staying inside of the vehicle. Behind the UE, we have this small tracked trailer. It weighs around 700 kilograms and it can also carry quite a large load of ammunition, supplies that were needed at the front. And this trailer was also designated by Renault as the Renault AK, so it had a different designation. The suspension and tracks is very similar to a Vickers Cardinal Lloyd Mark IV. Some people think it was actually copied while no license rights were paid, but it is very similar to some of these vehicles that you find in the beginning of the 30s, around Europe. The Renault UE was a small vehicle and only had a crew of 2 people. You had the driver over here and the tank commander over there. So a very small vehicle, and it also had a very limited height. And that means if the person would be sitting inside the vehicle, his head would still be above the vehicle, so not protected. And that's why Renault made this kind of armored visors. It looks a bit like a medieval helmet. And when you were sitting inside the tank, you could lower it, and you still had a vision slit while being protected by the steel. Like this. You could also still raise it. More visibility like that. And another interesting fact is, when these visors were lowered, you didn't have any possible means to communicate with the tank commander and the driver, because they were each in their own little capsule. And the tank commander, he was able to illuminate small lights over here that had different colors: red, green, blue, and white. And by continuously glowing or flickering one of these lights, he was able to give signals to the driver like stop, continue, left, right, emergency brake, all kinds of commands like that, while glowing or flickering the buttons. An armed reconnaissance variant of the Renault UE was also developed, equipped with a 7.5mm Mach-31 machine gun. However, this design was not adopted by the French army. In 1936, China ordered 10 of these armed versions, along with 12 Renault ZB light tanks. Under Japanese diplomatic pressure, however, the shipment was blocked. The vehicles were ultimately confiscated at Haiphong, Vietnam, then still French Indochina, and never reached China. While the Renault UE was a handy little vehicle for logistics, it also had some downsides. One of them was the very narrow tracks. They were only 17 centimeters wide, so that's a bit like holding your hand like this. Not very useful on uneven terrain with a lot of mud. It was very easy to get stuck. And it's also very small compared to the larger French tanks, just as the French Charène B1 bis, which had very larger tracks. And another downside was its large fuel consumption. So while it has around 2 tanks of 56 liters, it consumed so much that was only able to have a range of about 100 kilometers. So that's not a lot for such a small little vehicle. And also meant that the vehicle had to be transported to its zone of action by flatbed trailers on trucks as well. So it had to be transported there, while it's still a very light vehicle. So that's quite a downside. Now for the most fun part, exiting the video without harming myself. I'll have to be extra careful this time because it's still a functional vehicle. Let's see, first I'll have to open the armored visors. Like this. Then this little part. Et voilà. The Renault UE. Romania also became a significant user of the Renault UE. In 1939, the Malaxa factory in Bucharest began licensed production of the Renault UE, designated as the Chenillette Malaxa Type UE. Romania initially imported about 10 vehicles and planned a domestic run of 300 vehicles, but only 126 were completed before production ceased in 1941. The fall of France cut off the supply of French-made components necessary for assembly. The Romanian-built vehicles were externally almost identical to the French UE2, but they featured a slightly higher payload capacity. Unlike the French, who restricted the UE to lighter weapons, the Romanians employed their version to tow heavier guns, such as the 47mm Schneider Model 1936 anti-tank gun. Following the occupation of France, Germany supplied Romania with 50 captured Renault UEs. By 1944, 17 of these were rebuilt to tow even heavier German 5cm Pak 38 anti-tank guns, extending the vehicle's utility in excess service. During the Battle of France in 1940, the Renault UE Chenillette was the most numerous armored vehicle in French service. Designed solely as a light supply tractor and ammunitions carrier, it was not a combat vehicle. In static or fortress-based operations, such as along the Maginot Line, it performed its logistical role effectively, ferrying ammunition and supplies to frontline troops under artillery fire. However, in the face of the German Blitzkrieg, the Renault UE proved unsuited to modern mobile warfare. Its slow speed, minimal versatility compared to German half-tracks, and inability to keep up with the retreating or redeploying units meant that large numbers were abandoned. As French forces collapsed in May and June 1940, thousands of UEs fell intact into German hands. After the German victory, the Wehrmacht pressed approximately 3,000 captured Renault UEs into service. They were redesignated as Infanterie UE Schlepper 630F when employed as artillery tractor, and as Munitionsschlepper Renault UEF when used as supply carriers. Some were modified into self-propelled anti-tank vehicles, mounting weapons such as the 3.7 cm Pak 36, which saw service during Operation Barbarossa, or fitted with Wurfrahmen 40 rocket launchers. Other adaptations included snowplow-equipped versions for the Eastern Front, telephone cable-laying vehicles, and even dummy tanks disguised as Soviet T-34s for training and deception purposes. The Luftwaffe also operated a variant known as the Sicherungsfahrzeug UEF, which was used to guard airfields against partisan attacks. Some of these received on a large armored superstructure at the rear, allowing a guard armed with a 13mm machine gun to provide defensive fire.
The Army Museum has also another sort of Renault UE, but it's a quite special exemplar of this machine because it's a Germanized one. So as you can see here, we have the German license plate, WL, because it's a Luftwaffe vehicle, and it was used as a guardian of the airfield of Melsbroek. So near Brussels, there is an airfield still in use today, but at that time it was used by the German during the war, and between 1940 and 1944 they used this particular Renault to prevent attacks from the free fighters, the resistance. So you can see the Germanized version is a little bit different from the French version because we have here some metal plates, 2 or more the passenger seat, and to put a machine gun. Here it's a MG34, but it's often aviation armament like the MG151, but it was used as a guardian, so it was not needed to be very armed. The German version also have the Balkenkreuz, which means the cross of the German army, and we are lucky to have an example which is still in its original color. So you can see the Dunkelgelb, which means the dark yellow of the German army. It was made at the beginning of 1941, 1942, and it was still in use in 1944 when the Allied are in Belgium arrived in Belgium, sorry. So it has the same purpose than the French version at the back of the vehicle. So you have this box here to carry some ammunitions and so on. But this exemplar has not his trailer anymore, and those specific versions had no trailer at the back of the vehicle. So this Renault was used by the German to patrol around the airfield, and it has a special name dedicated to this purpose. So the German give the name Sicherungsfahrzeug to this little Renault. Well, Sicherungs means security, and Fahrzeug, vehicle. So it's a vehicle for security of the airfields. You can see here also the German designation. So you have Panzer Renault UE, and then the weight of the vehicle, which is 2 tons. It's a little bit more than 2 tons. Well, not only the Germans reused this kind of vehicles, because when they landed in Normandy, the US paratrooper also reused that kind of Renault UE, but it was not only those Sicherungsfahrzeug, it was also other kinds of Renault UE, like, for example, those armed with rocket and so on. So many purposes for a little vehicle from the French army and many users of this little vehicle.